Hi everybody, this is Dr. Fitz. I'm going to give you a short introduction to our text that we're going to be reading over the next couple of weeks, Learning a New Land by Marcelo and Carola Suarez-Orozco. The Suarez-Orozcos are professors at UCLA and I believe also at NYU, and they founded the Harvard Immigration Project. They are internationally recognized for their research on immigration and globalization. And just a little background on the two authors. Marcelo Suarez-Orozco is an anthropologist, and I'm most familiar with his work because that's also my interest. And then Carola is a cultural psychologist, and they're both immigrants, but from different pathways. So this book is the result of the LISA study, which is the Longitudinal Immigrant Student Adoption Study, as noted here. And there's a link to their website where you can find all of the interview protocols that they used, and that's pretty interesting. You might even find an interview question that you might be able to use when you do your interviews. Anyway, the Suarez-Orozcos and quite a number of research assistants, bilingual, bicultural research assistants, observed and interviewed immigrant youth in Boston and San Francisco areas over the course of 5 years. And on the notes page that I'm providing for you has a little bit more detailed information about the methods that they used. They used a variety of methods, and they wanted to basically study the impact that immigration has on youth, that's academically, socially, emotionally, etc. And they wanted to see how are schools and other institutions assisting or not assisting with that acculturation process, and what are some of the characteristics of quote successful immigrant youth, because they have found that there is a pattern of declining achievement for immigrant youth. Not just the Suarez-Orozcos, but other researchers as well have noted that really the longer that you're in the United States as an immigrant, the worse you tend to do academically, which is problematic. So that was one of the reasons they wanted to do this study. Other reasons why this study was important is just because of the prevalence of kids who are members of immigrant families. It's about 20% of kids have one or more parents who's an immigrant, and about 13% of kids in North Carolina are immigrants or are children of immigrants. In the first chapter, they discuss a lot of characteristics of immigrant families, and to sum it up, immigrant families do tend to be two-parent homes, although they're all different types of constellations, and parents usually are, one or more parents are usually working. So the participants in this study, they were generally a part of the working poor, so they weren't necessarily among the very poorest of the poor, because most of them had jobs, although that did change over the course of the study. And Chapter 1 delves into academic engagement and performance, because the bulk of the book discusses profiles that they created of some of the youth that they studied. And they basically grouped the kids into 5 groups. High performers, those were children, youth. So they were about 12 when they started the study, most of them, and about 17 or 18 when they finished the study. So I'm saying children, but they were children and youth throughout the study. So they were grouped into 5 different categories: high performers, slow decliners, precipitous decliners, improvers, and low achievers. And you know, one of the unfortunate things that they found was over half of the kids, their achievement did decline over the course of the 5-year study. And one of the things the researchers pointed out was that decline often occurred in year 4 or 5. So it was good that they stuck with the study that long, because otherwise it would have seemed like everybody was doing just fine. But then there was a group of students who were high achievers at the outset and were able to remain high achievers throughout. And then there was also a smaller group of kids who actually improved over time. So as we are reading this text, I just think that it's important to look at what are some of the different factors that help kids be more resilient and continue to succeed. A lot of the kids, when you're reading about it, a lot of the kids like in the slow decliner group were high achievers, and then over time it was difficult for them to maintain that level of achievement. In chapter 1, they also talk about like some of the things that impacted achievement, and they found that girls were more likely than boys to be high achievers, and they also found that the school environment was very important and had a big effect on student outcomes. What factors did they look at? I think like the two here, behavioral engagement and relational engagement, were particularly important and included like behavioral engagement sort of included a bunch of other factors that one might consider like engagement in school basically. So what they considered behavioral engagement included attendance, doing homework, paying attention and participating in class and things like that. And so those youth that exhibited behavioral engagement in school, guess what, did better in school as well. Relational engagement was also important, and that is basically feeling connected to the school in some way. That could be teachers, peers, school activities, your self-efficacy and attitudes towards school. Those affect your relational engagement. Chapter 2 describes the importance of social relationships in the lives of immigrant youth, and just discusses how, a lot of times we think about migration or immigration in terms of economic push and pull, like people leave to find a job or people are pulled because there is work in a particular area, and that is for certainly true, but what they're pointing out here is that migration and immigration are their social networks that exist. And so, for example, here in Boone, we have a lot of folks who came from Paracho, Michoacan, originally to work in the Christmas tree industry, and because of those familial networks, people go back home over there, and then folks in Paracho are like, oh, their life is good in Boone, or I have family there, so I'm going to move there. I mean, you'll meet people from very rural areas who come here to this pretty rural area, and social networks are usually, and family are usually the things that draw them here. So, one of the things that's important to think about in terms of kids is that they often experience separation from their families. And so that's what a lot of this chapter discusses is, some of the stresses and challenges that come about from familial separations and then also reunification. And about 85% of the young people in this study had been separated from one or both parents, and also from siblings during the process of migration. And they just discuss how that can affect kids in different ways. And they also discuss that the literature on this tends to focus on the negative aspects because most of the research done is done in clinical settings on people who have sought help. So there are also families for whom separation and reunification might not be traumatic, and those tend to be less documented in the research literature, is one thing they wanted to point out. Chapter 3 focuses on the portraits, the ethnographies of middle schools and high schools, samples from the schools that the participants were enrolled at. And so when you think about the school environments, think about how those different aspects of engagement were fostered. So the cognitive engagement, the relational engagement, and the behavioral engagement. How did the school environments foster those forms of engagement? Did you see, what aspects of the school positively affected those factors, or negatively affected? So let's see if we can see any relationships between, what they're saying is important for success, and then how they describe the schools that the kids were in. So that's my brief introduction to chapters 1, 2, and 3. And please go ahead and read over the reading guide, and please take your own notes on chapters 2 and 3 and bring those to class with you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.